So I think a problem a lot of people have when it comes to estate planning is that it adds a slightly different dynamic to how we think about our finances. So often we're used to working with professionals, maybe we work with a financial advisor, maybe we work with an accountant, and we're used to looking at where we are today, and we're used to planning what our future will look like from that perspective. So it's considering where we are today and we're looking forward. So financial advisors may encourage you to look at pensions. They may encourage you that during your working life, you're going to be able to rely on an income. And whenever you retire, you need to have some provision in place. And ultimately, it's our own individual lifespan that we plan for. When we start to look at building generational wealth, it's a slightly different dynamic because we're not planning for our lifespan. We're beginning to plan for our children's lifespan, our grandchildren's lifespan. Because ultimately, you're someone who's building capital, so you have more income than you need. You're able to save, you're able to invest. And if you're doing that in a way that means that you're not going to spend all of that money and end up when you pass on with your last check bouncing, ultimately you've built capital that you'll be able to pass on. So it's a different dynamic. And I think a lot of the professional advice that we get is designed to look at ourselves. It isn't designed to look at that intergenerational plan. When we consider the intergenerational plan, we consider inheritance tax. So ultimately, what you've built, the capital that you've managed to accumulate and save over your lifetime, will be taxed at 40% when passing to the next generation after certain allowances and reliefs. And that's quite a significant sum of money. So if you have built £5 million of capital, your inheritance tax on that £5 million could be £2 million, meaning that your children would get three. Um, Succession planning, planning for that eventuality, means planning today for something that your children will face in the future. However, if you do plan effectively today, you can protect the £5 million of capital that you built up, and you can ensure that your children benefit from as much of that as you can. So um, it's a different topic than most professional advisors will look at. It's a different dynamic than we will generally consider when we're looking at ourselves moving forward. And most people don't have experience of it because their families didn't come from wealth. Perhaps you haven't been involved in conversations about your parents planning and them passing something down to you, which means, especially if you're the first person in your family who has really created wealth, um, you will be the first person in your family who has really had to consider succession planning for a legacy that you have built. And it takes a different mindset. So you're not planning for yourself, your future. You are, but you're going much further than that. And you're actually thinking about how you can build and structure your wealth in a way that will become a legacy for future generations of your family. It means you need to do extra work. It means you may need to have conversations with other professionals. It may mean that there are costs involved in the planning that you're doing. And if you don't have the mindset that you're building a family legacy, that may be a reason why people don't look at estate planning. It may be a reason that people don't seek out advice, think about the challenges that are ahead of them and what you can do today to plan for those challenges. So, what do you need to look for? Estate planning is definitely something that you need to go and look for. Um, when you're at a place in your life where you know you're building capital, you know you're investing for the future or the future of your family, you need to actively go and think about how can I structure this in the right way? What different challenges are coming at me? And what do I need to do to make sure that the legacy that I leave behind is going to be protected, is going to provide for my loved ones in the way that I want it to provide for my loved ones, and how to manage that legacy, how to become a steward of that legacy as it passes from generation to generation. And this is something that most people won't have that mindset. They won't get involved in that kind of thinking on a day-to-day basis. So what do you need to look for? You need to understand those dynamics. You need to be aware of what it means to build a legacy. You need to be aware of the challenges that are going to come at you. You need to get information and understanding of that. And you need to build relationships with professionals who can actually help you on that journey. So there's always an education piece when working with clients because they may not understand much about inheritance tax. They may not understand much about some of the legal structures that you use, like trusts, to help you to become more tax efficient. But going beyond tax, they may not have thought about what legal structures need to be put in place to give structure to that legacy. Because ultimately, people will have to manage that for you. And you may want to create a framework that they have to work within to manage that legacy as effectively as they can and in the way that you would want them to. We all know the sort of stories of one generation builds wealth, the next generation may maintain it, and the next generation spends it. If your intention is to build a family legacy that generation after generation after generation can benefit from, but you also want them to have the mindset that they're going out, they're doing something, they're working, they're adding value, as opposed to just spending the money that you have built. Um, you may need to put structure in place to enable that to happen, and structure in place to enable those people to step in and actually continue to manage and build on the legacy that you have put in place. For yourself, you may be successful, you may want to spend some of that wealth, and then you may also want to plan for the future and think about what you're saving and the legacy that you're building. So there's something you need to consider in terms of what will you actually spend yourself, what lifestyle do you want to have, what lifestyle do you want to fund, and beyond that, do you have the ability to save, invest, and ultimately build a legacy that's going to benefit future generations. There's a lot of clients that I would come across who perhaps do this not in a deliberate way, but almost find themselves in this position, perhaps because they've invested in property. So when you invest in property, you have capital tied up in property. And when you hold property for a long period of time, it can be expensive to get rid of. So if you dispose of your property, you might have capital gains tax. And you could have capital gains tax that's been building up for 10, 20, 30 years. So it's not uncommon that I would meet clients and they may have 3 or 4 properties. They may be living now in a position where they're comfortable, but perhaps don't have access to a lot of extra income. And sometimes they actually sacrifice on some of the lifestyle things they would like to have. However, they have significant assets that are essentially tied up in property. Um, so by not planning in a sort of deliberate way, they end up in a position where they have capital, they built capital, but actually they don't have the freedom that they would like to have in terms of their cash flow, in terms of money that's available to them to spend. So they become asset rich and cash poor. If you want to build a legacy and you understand the different ways that this can be achieved, you can think about your lifespan as well as the legacy that you're building, and make sure that essentially you've been sensible in terms of how you choose to save and invest, to make sure that you actually can enjoy the lifestyle that you want to live and still leave behind a legacy that you want to leave behind. And again, that is structured in a way that the next generation will be able to step in and manage that and benefit from it, but hopefully also to grow it, to certainly maintain it for the next generation and the next generation. So these are all things that really you have to go out and look for yourself, and working with a professional in this area, we can help you to really understand what's available to you as you build your estate, so that you're building it in the right way into the next generation. So where do the problems come? Um, well, as I've said, you're not just planning for your lifespan, you're now planning for generational wealth. You're now planning with something that you want to pass on to the next generation. And it may be something that you've never done before. So there may just be a lack of knowledge. Um, there may be a lack of experience if you haven't done this before, and if within your family you haven't done this before. You haven't benefited from receiving generational wealth. You may be the first person in your family who's actually building generational wealth. And ultimately, you're working towards a position where you may have 40% inheritance tax. So if you plan for your lifespan the way you might naturally, you will tend to do this in a way where you buy assets that you own. And the way we tend to buy assets, generally those assets will be in your estate for inheritance tax. Because most people aren't going to build a really significant estate where they need to worry about inheritance tax because they're planning for their lifestyle. They may end up spending their money in retirement, and then ultimately there may not be much of an inheritance tax liability at the end. If you're building an estate where you know you're going to leave capital behind, it doesn't make sense to build it in a way where ultimately you will have 40% inheritance tax to pay. And we're focusing a lot on inheritance tax. However, it's not just the tax element that can be a problem with succession. If you leave a substantial legacy behind, you're leaving it to somebody. So during your lifetime, you can make those financial decisions, you can manage the money. When you're gone, somebody else has to step in and manage the money. Um, this may be your children. So your children need to have the financial education to understand that they're going to receive an inheritance and to understand how to manage that inheritance, what they need to do to manage it, whether they should be spending it, what they should be spending it on, whether it should be supplementing their lifestyle, whether they should be using that money to continue to invest and build and grow, or essentially to strike a balance between those two things, because you may want your children to benefit from what you've built up. You may want your children to have more opportunities than you have had. but you may also want them to use those opportunities to generate more wealth for future generations of your family, because they've had a leg up, and now you want the next generation and the next generation to also benefit from that. You need to give people financial education, otherwise you're just giving them the finances, and now they have the responsibility for managing the finances, but they may not be prepared for it. So inheritance tax can be a problem, but also handing financial responsibility to somebody who doesn't have financial education can be a problem as well. And for decision making, can see that legacy dwindle.